Welcome back to Out Loud, the Selective Mutism podcast. I'm Chelsea.
And I'm Meg.
My mom is not here this week, so I actually have a special guest, Meg, who, by the roommate gods, blessed me with Meg in college. She was a randomly assigned roommate, but we ended up being very close friends. And she is now a speech-language pathologist. So I thought it would be cool to have her on and get her insight. So do you want to talk a little about, what you do for work?
Sure. Well, I work full-time at 2 elementary schools in a city in Mass with preschool to 6th graders. And then I also work at a private practice part-time with kiddos from 2 to 13. Mm-hmm. This will be my 3rd year as an SLP, and I love what I do. Yeah.
Nice. What, what kind of diagnoses do you come across?
So I work with many different populations, autism, speech sound disorders, language disorders. I see a lot of kids who know more than one language or who speak more than one language. Apraxia of speech, deaf and hard of hearing. And I've actually seen a few kiddos with selective mutism.
Yes. Yeah, I was so excited that you actually came across some. So, when I met you, I never, made it very clear that I had selective mutism. It wasn't something I, blabbed about until later on. I decided to share that with the world.
I thought that was so exciting when you shared that, and really brave, and honestly, it inspired me to share my own health stories online too.
Yeah, thank you. So how did you become aware of selective mutism?
I think I first heard about it actually when we were roommates, and I had an internship. Yeah. At a preschool, and there was a girl who had I think she had selective mutism. I don't know. There was a question of it. Mm-hmm. And I remember one of my classmates actually did a project on it, and it was talked about as this super rare diagnosis and really interesting. And then I came across it when I started in the school district that I work at.
Wow. Yeah. So it's not as uncommon as we think it is. Most teachers I talk to actually know what it is now. And I find that surprising because when I was growing up, nobody knew what it was. So it's definitely good that people are starting to learn more about it. There's a lot of myths around it. People think that it's intentional, or kids are intentionally not talking and it's some kind of defiant disorder. Mm-hmm. But it's really rooted in anxiety. There's probably a lot of other speech reasons why. I don't know the terms of the SLP world, but I'm sure there are. I know there's studies talking about kids who stutter, that also might be part of why they're selectively mute, because they
because of the anxiety around the stuttering. Oh, that makes sense. Yeah, I definitely think it should be a collaborative effort between people with psych backgrounds, and speech can certainly be helpful. I remember thinking in the schools that I wish that the school psychologist was more involved, because I feel like it should really be a combination, because I don't have that knowledge of anxiety.
Yeah.
I know my own anxiety, but
yeah, definitely. I can relate to that. Yeah, I definitely think that it should be collaborative. There's behavioral approaches, as well as a lot of the time behavioral approaches, we ignore things like anxiety and the feelings of our clients, which is changing, which is great. And I think all BCBAs should be thinking about anxiety and emotions, even though we can't observe them. But I don't know. I think we also need to get better at, when I say we, I mean behavior analysts and therapists in general need to get better at working together, like with speech. I think a lot of the time everyone's on a different page. Like a kid will have speech services, but they're like doing something completely different from what the teacher's doing. Then they're doing something different in therapy, and then they're doing something different at home. So it doesn't end up being effective.
Yeah, I agree. It helps when everyone's on the same page and everyone can use their different knowledge and experience to create like the best treatment and plan that we can provide. Because I know actually I work with an ABA therapist with one of my clients every week now, and I'm so grateful that I have that extra support.
Love to hear that.
Yeah.
A lot of the time it's like in schools I've seen, well, I've only worked in one school, but I've seen the paraprofessional, or I guess the ABA therapist, if they have that training, they'll like, oh, it's time for speech, and they drop them off and go off and take a break. It's like, well, it would be better if you work together with the speech therapist. So I don't really know a lot about like I've been to speech therapy sessions, a few of them, but mostly with kids with autism. So I'm just wondering, like, what kind of tools you use, or like what does like a typical session look like? I know that's like a crazy question because so they're all different.
Yeah, so they can look really different. In schools, it's a lot of group work. So I have 60 kids that I see every week that are on my caseload in the schools. And it definitely looks different for like a preschooler who's working on language, so like making sentences, versus a preschooler who's working on saying sounds correctly. And certainly by grade level too. So we use a lot of visuals and cues, positive reinforcement. Oh my gosh, it's been so long with this pandemic that I'm like, what does a typical speech session look like?
I know, because now you do it on telehealth or whatever.
Yes.
Is that challenging? Like, is it very different? I haven't actually done it.
Yeah, so with some kids, it's pretty, I won't say it's easy, but they respond really well with it because they love the computer.
Right.
But other kids, depending on attention span and interest level, it can be a little bit more challenging. We have the freedom to make whatever plan that we thought our kids needed during through March, through the end of the school year. So that was nice because I could do 15-minute sessions, which were perfect for my younger ones. But this year it's going to look different with providing IEP services.
Right. Because we can't work on some of those goals anymore.
Right.
Yeah. It's been interesting.
Yeah.
I'm glad I'm not working in a school right now because it seems like it's very complicated.
Yeah.
But everyone's doing their best. Everyone I know who works in the school, I think they're amazing right now.
I was just going to say, we're all just trying to survive and
yes,
do the best that we can.
Especially these kids with selective mutism, when it comes to telehealth, they are having trouble being on camera. So I can imagine it would be really hard to have a session with someone who doesn't even want to participate, pretty much. I don't know if you have anything to add to that. I'm wondering what therapists are doing to get kids involved who aren't interested, or
right. I feel like I know I had one student who refused to get on camera, refused to go on, and we actually had him go on a whole class one and just keep his camera off for the first time and just listen. And then the next time we said, okay, let's put your camera on, but you don't have to participate. Yeah. And then actually the last day of school, he was participating and talking. Nice. So that was good to see. Yeah. Sometimes it's just easing them into it, I think.
Right. And taking the pressure off.
Right. Yeah. And it is weird. The first time I would see students in March on the computer, I would make a point to be like, this is weird, right?
Yeah.
We're in our houses and we're talking on the computer. And most of them would laugh, and then it kind of became the new normal. But
yeah,
and I guess it kind of depends on where everyone is in their, we'll say, journey. But sometimes it's really helpful to do the small groups.
Yep.
And then to try to schedule that with the pandemic obviously could be challenging. But I know kids that I've worked with, they might be not fine, but they might be comfortable talking with me one-on-one.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's a matter of getting like a friend in there or someone new. To be honest, I was very nervous that I was going to like do something wrong. And like, because he had made this is going on off topic, but he had made so much progress. And here I was like a first year grad student coming out of school being like, I don't want to do anything wrong. Like,
yeah,
that's going to make me regress.
I feel the same way. Yes, I always feel like worried that I'm going to do something wrong. But that's how we learn, I guess.
Yeah. It all worked out.
Yeah. I'm actually I'm on the American Speech-Language and Hearing Association website, ASHA. And it's really great. So yeah, ASHA, is that how you say it? I was going to definitely share it with this episode.
Yeah.
It has, it has a full selective mutism page.
Ooh, very cool.
Yeah. So they list like the treatment options that are SLP, like they separate behavioral from SLP. So the SLP treatment options are like augmentative and alternative communication, which we all know as AAC.
Yep.
Which for selective mutism, I am not a fan of, but I think if you're going to do it, it should definitely be temporary.
Yes. Like kind of used as a stepping.
Right. And for people who don't know what that is, it's just like replacing vocal speech with like aids, like symbols or actual devices. Like a lot of people with autism will use an iPad and they have different apps where they can form sentences to speak.
Yep.
But I have used, maybe when I was a kid, an example of that would be like I would put something on my desk, like a piece of paper or something, and that signaled that I had to go to the bathroom. So that is me communicating by putting something on my desk.
Right.
But that didn't stay in place forever. Eventually I had to like vocally ask to use the bathroom.
Right. And that's with speech, that's like the goal is to provide those cues and that help, but then to eventually build that independence so that
there's also, they also list augmented self-modeling. Have you heard of this? It's like we do self-modeling in ABA where to teach skills, like we'll have a video of someone like emptying the dishwasher and then we'll show that and they can follow along with the video. But this is kind of like the same thought as that because they are, but I think it's the child actually watching themselves.
Yes.
Being successful at some social interaction, which could be difficult. Like you'd have to somehow record them when they're comfortable.
Right. I find it very nerve-wracking to listen to myself or like watch videos of myself that I can imagine that might create some challenges.
Definitely. And a lot of people with selective mutism say that they don't like the sound of their voice, and that is part of why they don't like speaking. So just something to think about if you're gonna try something like that. And then they also list DIR floor time, which I have heard a lot about, but I don't have any experience with.
So I've heard of the DIR floor time.
Have you ever used it, or you've just heard of it?
I've just heard of it.
Yeah.
I mean, to an extent, some of those principles we use as speech therapists that like we work to have like the total communication approach. So whatever, whether it's using signs or gestures or an AAC device to get them to get students to communicate what they need or what they want to tell us. So I feel like that's somewhat similar to what this is saying.
So ritual sound approach is the next one they list, and I actually, it's part of SCAT, which is, I did a whole episode on that, the social communication anxiety treatment.
Ooh.
So ritual sound approach is teaching sound production like in smaller parts, I believe. Okay. So they start with like just small sounds and then they work up to words.
So it'd be like saying ha or ha, hat. like kind of moving up. In speech, we call it a hierarchy. So we do the same thing with when we work on speech sounds that kids can't say. We start just syllables and then the words, phrases, sentences, reading, structured conversation, and unstructured conversation. So it kind of seems like it uses that.
Yeah. It's interesting though, because like kids with selective mutism can like make those sounds. They can speak those words in other settings, but once you put them in like some uncomfortable environment, all of a sudden they feel like they can't make a single sound. So I think starting with these smaller sounds would be easier than like prompting them to say a whole word. So it makes sense to me that you would start like smaller and work up to a full word.
I agree with that. And brings them some success.
Yeah.
Could lead to some good confidence to get to those words and stuff.
It also says they use like an alphabet board. I don't know if you've ever done this, and the kid crosses off like which sounds they can produce. So it's kind of like self-monitoring and probably a little reinforcing, like I can do all of this. And you can see your own progress.
That's something huge I've been trying to work on with my older kids, is that they know why they come to speech, and they know it's not just to play games.
Yeah.
And that we're working on whatever it is, and that this is how they're doing, and they take so much pride in that, which I really have enjoyed seeing.
That's awesome. I think that's a big part of probably everything, but selective mutism, I'm always thinking like these kids need to be like involved in their own treatment and have some kind of say over like what their goals are, and they need to have that like internal motivation.
I agree. Right, what do they want to work on to be successful, or like what does success look like to that student? You know what I mean? It can look so different for everyone.
Pragmatic approach.
I feel like this is kind of what was written in the goals so the goals for my student were already written, and this is how the goals were written.
Right. This is like a shaping procedure, it sounds like.
Yeah.
What we would call it in ABA. So you're shaping, it can start with nonverbal social engagement, move to verbal, but you're reinforcing like moving up that hierarchy.
Yep.
Yeah, so it's kind of like systematic desensitization, kind of.
Yeah, and like talking with someone you already know versus someone new, volume of voice.
So to
go from whispering to a regular volume, which people you use each volume with.
Right, in different environments, like certain classes might be harder than others, so gradually working up to that.
And with certain teachers.
Yeah, definitely. You need teachers on board, or it's like a major roadblock.
Definitely.
Like, what happens when you're like referred a case? Like, what is like the whole like assessment and stuff look like?
So it'll look kind of different based off what setting you're in, but do you want me to just talk about schools?
Yeah.
Okay. So in the schools, it can be that a teacher noticed that a kid was having a hard time, a parent noticed they were struggling with language or speech sounds. A lot of the times referrals will just come from speech sounds, because that can be the most noticeable. Like, oh, they're not saying red right, they're saying wed. Whereas language difficulties can be a little bit more
like harder to catch, or
right. Harder to catch, because especially for kids who are bilingual. And so in the schools, we do standardized assessments. A lot of times I do informal speech and language samples, so I just write down everything they're saying and analyze that, observing them in the classroom, looking at some of their work in the classroom, because their language difficulties can show in their writing. So to look at their written work is also important.
That's interesting. Are they I can't talk either. Are they usually similar? Like, if they're making a mistake in their writing, is that also reflected like in their speech?
Yeah, so if with language, if they have trouble with vocabulary or making sentences, they're going to write down the sentence that they would say out loud.
Mm-hmm.
So like irregular past tense verbs, like if they say she goed to the mall, they'll write that down as well. Sometimes you do see that with speech disorders that they'll write or read the same way that they pronounce the word. So like they would write W instead of R.
That makes sense. I don't know why I've never thought of that.
Yeah, I think it was a big like emphasis on it when I was in grad school, and I think it's becoming more and more common to address.
That's interesting. I'm curious because when I was little, I've read assessments about myself that are funny because my English was great. Like I can speak like language. Now I can't, but I used to speak grammatically correct. As like a small child, like age appropriate sentences and like everything was great. But then I would kind of revert almost, like I would intentionally use improper language, like which we called like baby talk. It was like part of anxiety, like how I would downplay myself or something so that people didn't take me as seriously. But I'm just curious. I wonder if people looked at that as like, oh, she has issues with language, or it was like, I don't know, if it was noticed that it's different in different settings. Like, I guess you probably observe kids in different settings, so you would notice something like that.
Yeah, they might in the classroom use different language than how they talk with their friends at recess or even at home. And I think it's a common, I could be wrong, but a misconception that children with selective mutism don't know language, so to speak, or like that's the problem. When really like your language is great. It's just that anxiety piece.
Yeah.
If I'm wrong about anything, please just correct me.
Oh, you're right.
This is learning for me too.
And I think that's a big problem because a lot of people act like you don't have any thoughts or you're not hearing. Like they just assume that if you're not speaking that there's nothing going on there, or
right.
I don't know. It's like you can't hear either. It's like I can hear everything you're saying about me.
Yeah. It's ridiculous.
Yeah. It's just in different settings, you get different responses from a kid with like intense anxiety. I don't know. Do you think like in the speech world, like a lot of people know about selective mutism, or is it kind of like you just happen to come across it?
I think it's becoming more and more well known within the speech world. I think it's pretty commonly talked about, and I think a lot of, at least conversations I've had with others, is that interprofessional collaboration that professionals just really need to work together, because we all have such great knowledge in our own fields that just need to be put together to really help clients, students.
So I've seen SLPs take data before, which is very exciting to me.
Yes.
Do you also take data?
Yes, I have to.
Does everyone have to take data?
So I don't want to call out any SLPs, so any SLPs listening, sorry. But we're supposed to, because that's what drives our instruction. That's what drives what we're going to work on the next time. And you can get like a rough estimate in your head, but how reliable is that?
Yeah.
So I am very religious with taking data.
That's amazing.
Sometimes it can be difficult when kids notice that you're taking data.
Yeah.
They're like aware of it, and they'll be like, what are you writing? Like, because you don't want them to, I don't want my kids to become like hyper aware that they're being marked for everything.
Yeah.
But it is important to see progress or even regression, especially right now with the pandemic. It'll be so important to take the data when I get back to see how they were in March versus now.
Yeah, definitely. I know. I think regression, I keep saying it's sad, but I think it's going to happen. And
I agree.
All we can do is be prepared for that. Like, it's no one's fault. It's just what happened.
Right.
Because of this COVID-19 thing.
Yeah. There's just so many new normals right now.
Yeah.
And not that we want regression or that it's normal, but everything was changed so quickly around us. And for kids, that's even more difficult.
Yeah, and kids are pretty resilient. Like, I see them bounce back, and I see data go back to normal after a while, so I have faith that that will happen.
Yep.
Once things go back.
What does, like, data for a BCBA look like? So, like, when I take data, a lot of times I just do pluses or minuses if they do something right or wrong.
Yeah, it really depends on, like, what your goals are. I mean, if you're doing, like, a bigger task, you're breaking it down into each step, and you're marking it, like you said, a plus or a minus for, like, each step, so you can see, like, where the issues are, like what part of the task analysis is needing help. But we take a lot of, like, frequency data. Like, when it comes to behavior, it's like the frequency and the duration of things. Yeah, I think it has to depend on what the goals are. For selective mutism, the goals would be, like, speaking to new people or, like, asking questions, like asking for things.
The plus or minus system probably wouldn't be is not as beneficial, because you want to see, you know, what's being communicated, who it's being communicated with, and how, and not just
and what kinds
did they say a sound right or wrong.
I've also taken speech data because I work with people with autism who also usually get speech services, and we usually have like a data sheet that has, they want to know, like, exactly what they said, so we literally write out what they said or what they typed in on their device. And then you, like, record, like, whether they were able to do each step independently or they needed a prompt. So things like that I'm familiar with. Trying to think, like, with selective mutism, a lot of the time what I've seen them, they use, like, sticker charts, which aren't, it's more like a self-monitoring thing. Like, the kid gets to put their own sticker on there, or like a smiley face or whatever they want. They're like tokens. So every time they
communicate with someone or vocalize.
Yeah, anytime they say something, or maybe even just, like, if they have nonverbal goals, it depends on their goals. So if their goal is, like, waving to their teacher in the morning, they're putting, like, a sticker on there, which is data, but it's like the kid is taking their own data, and then they're also tokens, which are going to give them some kind of reward.
And I feel like it's a tough balance with, and I've felt this before with students with autism, of you want to reinforce and say, like, good job, or like, you know, use those visuals like sticker charts to support them. But also with communication, it's like the positive reinforcement is that you're communicating with someone and having a conversation.
Right. And getting your needs met.
So it's like finding that balance that they're not going to say something to get the sticker chart, but also know that, like, take pride in that they're doing it. So I feel like maybe that's a transition thing. And at first you might see charts and stuff and then eventually work to kind of take it away.
Yeah. And I know, like, older kids, like, come up with their own goals, and that becomes, like, they don't really need stickers or anything. They just are proud of themselves for being able to do things that they're motivated to do. Do you write goals? Like, or you do?
Yeah, so we write. Do you guys use that, like, the SMART acronym? With with verbal cues, student will wave to teacher every morning in 90% of opportunities, or something like that.
Oh, I found it. Specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, time-based.
Yes.
I have heard of that. I just don't know acronyms.
Yeah, that's how we write. We'll do long-term goals and then short-term.
I don't know what else. There was other stuff I wanted to say, but I don't know. I guess I always have people, like, sometimes they ask me, but sometimes I just see them on Facebook groups. They're like, who do I go to for therapy for my, like, kid with selective mutism? They're like, should I go to a speech therapist? It's like, well, you should be going to multiple people, and they should all be working together.
I agree. And I feel like, or would you agree that seeing a psychologist would be the first step to take? Okay, because that's what I
well, they're the ones who can diagnose, so that would definitely be the best thing. Because I'm assuming to get speech therapy, you need some kind of diagnosis. Is that? Yep. Right? Like it has to be formalized and everything.
And we can diagnose speech and language disorders.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think we can diagnose selective mutism.
Right.
I would want that other professional opinion and collaboration to make any major decisions.
Mm-hmm. I don't know. To me, I always felt like this was like before I had any actual contact with speech, and I always thought, like, why would a kid with selective mutism need a speech therapist? Like, they can talk fine. What would you say to that?
I feel like I keep going back to like the same thing of we all have different background knowledge in communication or anxiety, depending your specialty. We all have such specific knowledge that I think it can be helpful because we know about the social aspects of language and communication, but I would never want to see someone with selective mutism just seeing a speech therapist.
Right. Part of it is like not understanding what speech is, like a speech therapist does. Like they're not just teaching kids to talk, they're like setting goals. They're doing a lot of what behavior analysts do, which is like setting goals, taking data, like making accommodations for those kids.
Right. We do so much that I feel like probably with a lot of other professions people don't know about, and all the different things that we can treat and work with.
Yeah.
And kind of what drives that treatment. Whether it be speech sounds, language, stuttering, executive functioning, we even can work with. And we work across the lifespan, so it can be baby to end of life, swallowing disorders.
Yeah.
I'm forgetting big ones. Social language, AAC. I think we can be helpful, but I think it needs to be a team approach.
Right.
My main thought was
a collaborative approach. It's interesting though, because the speech therapist has like an interesting role. Usually they have them in schools, which not all schools have therapists in the school. I mean, a lot of kids don't have services in the school, but if they have a speech therapist, that's kind of like someone who can work with teachers. A lot of the time, I feel like teachers need more information and they don't know a lot about it. And like hearing from like a therapist would be helpful. I just think they have like a unique position. I mean, I've seen schools where there's no school psychologist, or they're not involved, or the caseload's like too big so they can't focus like a speech therapist can on one child.
So that's another helpful part that we can support, is being educators for other people.
Yeah.
So that they understand and know, how to help and what's not going to help.
Do you how do you get teachers on board? Like, do you have them into sessions, or do you do sessions in the classroom sometimes?
So in schools, we can take them out of the classroom and work in the speech room with the students, or go into the classroom. We call it push-in or inclusion. Yeah. And I find that that's really helpful, because you can support them, or even see, okay, they can do this in the speech room, but to do it in the classroom is really challenging. So I'm going to give them this tool to help them.
Yeah.
Or educating the teacher with honestly sending along that ASHA website, or making a list of things of like, do this and don't do this.
Yeah.
And also in schools, it's called the A grid, and that it's just consultation. So that could also be a part that you consult with the classroom teacher or the school psychologist to make sure that the accommodations are being put in place.
Oh, nice.
One thing I've thought about wondered, I guess, is, I don't know if you ever ran into this, but so in schools now, there's so many standardized tests that you have to talk into a microphone or something. What, as a person with selective mutism, that must be challenging.
Yeah. That's part of the test?
Yeah, that they have to narrate something.
Oh. Wow. Yeah, I definitely think that would be hard. I mean, there's probably accommodations I remember I had to record myself for something in school one time, and I could do it if no one else was in the room, and I felt like I knew who was going to be listening to the recording. So I think maybe if they had like a room to do it separately, it could be possible, but that's hard.
Even with some of my other students who have autism, that's really hard for them to do.
The same thing with like reading out loud, like assessing their reading skills through their ability to read out loud.
Right, because then it's reflected that, like, for some kids, you can't really use that as a true measurement, because that's a reflection of, whether it be their anxiety level or other diagnoses. But they might be reading just fine and understanding everything.
And reading out loud is so much harder than reading in your head. I don't understand why they do that.
That's something that's always interested me, bugged me. I think for some of my kids who might say a sound wrong, if they're saying wed, but they know that that's the color red, they're not reading it wrong. That's just how they say it. So they're understanding it's the color red.
Right.
So I feel like they shouldn't be marked for that, because that's something they need to work on with me. But
I couldn't even be assessed for that when I was in school. They were like, well, she won't do it, so we can't.
Okay. Yeah. What are some of the things that when you were little that you really appreciated people doing, and then stuff that irked you to no end?
Yeah, I guess stuff that I appreciated was like people giving me time and not like judging me for not being able to respond, or just really like not commenting on it and giving me my space, and trying to arrange the environment to make me more comfortable. Like I had teachers who would split us up into smaller groups, or like pair me with kids that I'm comfortable with. Things like that make a huge difference. And then things that really bother me are obviously like people that make a big deal out of it or comment on it or act like you're doing it on purpose. Like I won't say a lot of, but a lot of kids have a hard time understanding, and then sometimes you feel like the teacher is like annoyed with you because you're purposely not participating in the class or whatever, which just makes you feel bad about yourself, and it makes you feel like you're not going to be able to do it in the future. So you need like that supportive environment of people who are going to let you move at your own pace, I guess.
Yeah, definitely. I'd be interested though in seeing like the research in the different treatment paths and what's more effective or beneficial or helpful.
Yeah.
Short-term and long-term.
Yeah. There's not a lot about long-term.
Yeah. I'd be interested in researching that to see, so then I can make appropriate recommendations if I see a student with selective mutism, knowing, okay, if I support them this way, it's going to be really helpful, but research shows that this is not going to work.
Right.
Which is all part of evidence-based practice, which drives what we do.
Right.
So I guess it's just taking the time to educate ourselves even more, ourselves meeting SLPs, making sure that we are aware of things.
So, like, if you were given a referral, like, I guess this did happen, of a kid with selective mutism, you wouldn't see that as, like, out of your scope of practice because you've never worked with selective mutism before? Would you, I guess that's when, like, collaboration comes into it. I don't know, like, how would you approach it?
I would definitely talk with other SLPs if they've worked with kids with selective mutism, but then also referring out and not being afraid to say, like, hey, I, have knowledge of this, but not sufficient knowledge that I feel that I can help by myself. Let's get a referral to school psychologists or someone else who might be helpful, so that I learn and so that they receive what they need to.
Yeah.
It's like kind of getting over, I don't know if you call it pride, but like saying it's okay to say, like, I don't know.
Yeah.
Like that's better than pretending and then that can have such negative effects.
Yeah, definitely.
On so many people.
I always think about scope of practice because in this job, normally I just work with kids with autism and that is it. But this new job that I have, I'm like seeing all kinds of like psych diagnoses that I've never worked with. I'm seeing like hoarding, I'm seeing bipolar, schizophrenia. Like it's all behavior, which I understand, but it's like certain things you don't understand the psychology behind. You need to do the research or collaborate with other people and not be afraid to call in people who are actually experts in those diagnoses. And I think selective mutism is hugely like that because not many people know about it. So I think for a lot of harm could be done if you do not know what you're doing looked at. People need to work together. Yes, that is the takeaway.
Yes. And an SLP's scope of practice is so wide that sometimes it's hard to draw those lines, so to speak.
Yeah.
But it's all about kind of advocating for yourself, and then you're advocating for your client as well to say, no, they need better than what I can provide.
Right, because if you're not seeing progress, something needs to change. And I think that's what happens with selective mutism. There's people who haven't made progress for years and years and years, and it's like, why? Is it, I don't know, maybe you're doing the wrong kind of therapy or you have the wrong therapist, which doesn't mean there's anything wrong with the therapist. It just means there's a better fit out there, or like if you're not seeing progress, you need to change. Because there are studies where people get the correct therapy and they make progress like within a few sessions. Like that's how you know that it's working.
Right. Not seeing progress doesn't always mean you should terminate treatment. It just means you need something different, whether it be a different approach or a different therapist or specialty.
I was gonna say, like, there's a lot of like comorbidities too that I wanted to talk about, but I don't really like a lot. I've seen a lot of people with autism also have selective mutism diagnoses, which is interesting. People with autism are nonverbal in certain situations, which pretty much is the definition of selective mutism, but I think they could have different reasons.
Right, to decipher, kind of distinguish, okay, is this a language disorder, or is this, the anxiety, the psychology piece of it, or the motivation piece?
Yeah.
Are they motivated to socialize? Correct me if I'm wrong, but maybe that's a big difference between what you might see in autism versus selective mutism.
Yeah.
That you have that motivation, but with kids with autism, they don't always have that social motivation.
Yeah. There's also like sensory overload, like they could just kind of shut down, which can also happen with selective mutism. That's another thing. A lot of kids have sensory processing disorder who have selective mutism. But I think, it's probably different for every kid, but a lot of kids with autism have anxiety, and I think that is like a root of a lot of the behaviors that you see in autism.
Definitely. Also, when kids are getting diagnosed, one can easily be mistaken for another. If an individual has selective mutism, someone diagnosing who's not looking close enough might see symptoms of autism.
Yeah, I think the big difference is the situational aspect. Like, if a kid is not talking at school, but they're talking everywhere else and they're more comfortable, then it's probably selective mutism. But that doesn't mean you can't have both, because you can also be autistic and have certain situations where you feel more comfortable speaking in. But I think they do get mixed up because people see someone who just looks nonverbal, and has sensory issues maybe, and they jump to autism. It's so weird that kids can end up in speech but not have anything else like evaluated. I don't know. It's like, why aren't we looking at the whole picture?
Professionals, we should advocate for that, and then as humans and moms, dads, students, whatever, we should advocate for that everything is being looked at.
Yeah, that's pretty much all I have.
Thank you for having me on.
Yeah. Thank you for coming on.
I think after this conversation, I definitely feel like I want to go online and just like research and learn more about it and the different treatment options and what other professionals would do.
Yeah.
What their treatment would look like, things like that.
Mm-hmm. I'm actually trying to get involved in that. I was kind of close at the beginning before COVID hit, and I was talking with people at Boston Child Study Center, and I was like signing up for trainings and stuff, and then this happened and everything got canceled.
Oh man.
But I did get to volunteer at one like day camp thing. But I would like to go this route if it's possible.
That would be amazing. Oh my god. That's awesome.
It's weird because I think as like behavior analysts have the skill set for it, but they don't. So much of the time we look at behaviors as like, oh, how do we change it? Instead of like, oh, they're terrified. We need to like gradually ease them into it. I don't know. We ignore psychology and emotions.
Right.
Which is a problem.
Yeah, definitely.
I don't know. A lot of like ABA stuff, I like look at it and I'm like, I wouldn't want this happening to me as a child. Like the way that I don't know. It's like, I don't know. I think I have a different perspective of it because when I'm doing therapy, I'm like, oh, how would I want to be treated in therapy?
Yes.
I don't know.
Definitely.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming on.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Sharing your wisdom. Hi guys, I hope you enjoyed this episode of Out Loud, the Selective Mutism podcast. Please leave us a 5-star review on your favorite podcasting platform. If you want more information on speech and language pathology, go to asha.org, ASHA.org, and you can search selective mutism to see the treatments that we talked about. Thanks, bye.